right, let's go ahead and get started. For July, we are covering our buyer forms. All right, we're going to move up then to the buyer contingency removal, which falls right in line with these forms. We're always going to number our contingency removals. We start with one, the next one's buyer contingency removal number two, the buyer, right? So on and so forth. If there's a seller contingency removal, that's a separate form, so that will also get a one. So you might have a buyer contingency removal number one and a seller contingency removal number one. With the terms and conditions of the purchase agreement, it could also reference the request for repair. Now, keep in mind that sometimes our lenders want contingency removals for some reason. So I usually just leave them attached to that purchase agreement unless I'm attaching it to a request for repair or a response for a request for repair. But just be careful with that, because if I've checked this box for request for repair and then the lender asks for proof of contingency removal for some reason or another, and this is referencing a request for repair, now they're going to want to see the request for repair. That's going to open up a whole can of worms. So just be careful there. Date here is going to be the date in the upper left-hand corner of whichever document you're using, or the date that it was signed. Okay, if it doesn't have a date in the upper corner of the first page, then we go to the signature dates. Property, make sure you put the full address. Buyer's names go on the next line, sellers on the next. Buyer removal of contingencies. With respect to any contingency and cancellation right that buyer removes unless otherwise agreed to in a separate written agreement between buyer and seller, buyer shall conclusively be deemed to have completed all buyer investigations and review of reports and other applicable information and disclosures, elected to proceed with the transaction, and assumed all liability, responsibility, and expense, if any, for repairs, corrections, and the inability to obtain financing. Waiver of statutory disclosures is prohibited by law. Okay, you're not supposed to remove your review of seller disclosures, those statutory disclosures, without actually having received them. Okay, that's why it's important that you provide those up front on your listings, because then when a buyer removes that, they have the right to, they've actually seen it. Okay, keep that in mind. 2, buyer removes only the following individually checked buyer contingencies. Paragraphs refer to the CAR form, residential purchase agreement. Applicable paragraph numbers may be different on different forms. And then here it lists all of the options you have with regards to those contingencies. You've got your loan, you've got your appraisal, and you've got your investigation. Now, under investigation, you have the entire buyer's investigation contingency. You've got only part of the investigation related to inspections concerning physical attributes of the property. Or you've got all buyer investigations other than physical attributes, or entire buyer's investigation contingency except blank. So maybe it's time to remove those contingencies, but the home inspector recommended that the chimney was inspected and we didn't schedule one of those before. We might say, hey, we're removing the investigation contingency for the entire buyer's investigation contingency except chimney / fireplace inspection. And then we're going to ask for an extension of time for that one specific, right? So that's how that line works there. You can remove everything except like a piece of it. Okay. You've got insurability here on D. Here on E, you've got review of seller's documents. We can remove all of the review of seller's documents. Seller's documents except governmental reports, statutory and other disclosures, or other. Okay, so you've got options there. F is preliminary title report. G is your common interest. That's your HOA disclosures. H is review of leased or liened items. I is the sale of the buyer's property. Again, this only applies if you've got the contingency for the sale of the buyer's property in effect. J is anything else that you've written into the agreement. Okay, or you could go 3. So, right, so that's section 2 is buyers removing these individual contingencies. Section 3 is, hey, we're removing all the contingencies except blank. Now, notice here that it's not letting me check this box. It's just white, right? It's not blue. If I'm like, hey, we're moving everything but the loan contingency, now it automatically checks that box for me. So you're going to select on this section. It can get really frustrating if you don't figure this out. select the contingencies that you don't want to remove, and it will automatically check the box for number 3. Okay, your other option here is if buyer's completely done, we're ready to remove all contingencies, we check this box here. Now, keep in mind that if we check this box and we have the contingency for the sale of the buyer's property, which is good until the close of escrow of the buyer's property, and we check this box here for removing all contingencies, we have effectively removed the contingency for the close of escrow of the buyer's property. Okay, so be really careful with that. If we have a COP in place, we always want to come up here and check this box for the contingency. We're removing all contingencies except the contingency for close of buyer's property. Okay, please, please, please keep that in mind when we remove those contingencies, and don't accidentally remove that contingency when you do not intend to. Okay, so keep that in mind. This does remove everything. Oftentimes, we're going to have multiple contingency removal forms. We usually have one for like the loan, one for the appraisal. And the easiest way to do that, because oftentimes like our investigation and review of seller documents, it all happens at the same time. So oftentimes we go, hey, we're going to remove all contingencies except loan and appraisal. And then loan or contingency removal number 2 might be coming back and we're saying, hey, we're ready to remove that appraisal contingency. And then contingency removal number 3 might be now we're ready to remove the loan contingency. Contingency removal number 4 might be now we're ready to remove the contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. Close the escrow, right? So you might have several contingency removals. Let's see. Once all contingencies are removed, whether or not buyer has satisfied themselves regarding all contingencies or received any information relating to those contingencies, buyer may not be entitled to a return of buyer's deposit if buyer does not close escrow. This could happen even if, for example, buyer does not approve of some aspect of the property or the lender does not approve buyer's loan. If this form is attached to a request for repairs, seller's response and buyer reply to a request for repairs, or other form or document such as an addendum or amendment or to existing agreement, it is only valid if buyer and seller agree to the request made on that form or document. Okay, so if we're doing an amendment to the existing agreement, an AEA form asking for a change, and in response to that change or in exchange for that change, the buyer's willing to remove contingencies, we would want to make sure that, hey, we check this box up here and we put this is to the AEA form. Oops. AEA form, right? That we reference that because now this contingency removal isn't valid unless the seller agrees to that AEA form. Okay, and you really want to put AEA number 2, right? Or whatever number it is. And then you're going to put the date of that form on this here. Okay, now this form, even though it's signed and submitted to the seller, it's not valid unless we have an agreement on that AEA number 2. So that's our buyer contingency removal form. Any questions about that form? Okay. Now, keep in mind, because I get this question a lot of times too, is, hey, well, we agreed to repairs and I'm hesitant to remove our investigation contingency until those repairs are completed. Once the sellers agreed to repairs on a property or agreed to do something to the property prior to the close of escrow, we can remove those contingencies because now that agreement is part of the contract. The seller's contractually obligated to complete those repairs prior to the close of escrow. It doesn't have to be a contingency. The seller not completing those repairs becomes part of the contract. Okay, and that would give the grounds for the buyer to go after the seller for that action. All right, fabulous. Then that brings me to the end of our lesson today. Again, stay tuned for next week. We may have no training next week. We may just postpone Bob to the next month. So stay tuned for that one. Otherwise, he'll be probably next Wednesday. But I want to make sure we have a good turnout for that training. So I feel like last minute change maybe isn't the best option. And then starting next month, we'll return on Thursdays. This time, this link, we will be talking about all the seller forms. So things related to the sellers instead of the buyers. So we will see you. I'll see you in 2 weeks because I won't be here next week. And stay tuned for if we're doing a training next week or not. Otherwise, I will see you in August. Have a great day.
Thank you.